Have there been any new habits that you've formed in the last couple of years?
In terms of other habits,
Podcasting, surely. Okay, Drummond Orr, welcome back to Scotch and welcome to the Range Project.
Brendan, Sam, Steve, it's great to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
We're also really excited to have Brendan, a colleague and friend, who's the coordinator of the diploma program here at Scotch now, and spent several years working really closely with Drummond up to when you left in 2016, I believe. Brendan, did you want to do the honours in introducing Drummond?
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, and Drummond, thank you again so much for coming in. Drummond's about to leave our shores, heading off to Oxford on a scholarship to study his Masters in Economics there, looking at the intersection of mental health and economics under a Ramsay postgraduate scholarship from the Ramsay Scholarship for Western Civilization. He's also a Chancellor's Scholarship winner at the University of Melbourne and topped economics there, completing his honours last year. He's done work looking at universal basic income. He is a man who's deeply passionate about economics, about learning, and about solving the world's problems, and I feel like there's a big story yet to be written by this man. So Drummond, perhaps as we get started, I might just ask, give us a bit of a potted history of where you're at now and where you're hoping to be.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Sam, I graduated Scotch in 2016. Economics was my favourite subject. Sorry, it wasn't theory of knowledge, Brendan. Economics was my favourite subject, and I went to Melbourne to study a Bachelor of Commerce in Economics and Finance. And then last year I finished my honours year in economics. And I guess last year it was a year of introspection for me, and I was thinking about what area of economics really interested me. Contrary to popular belief, economics is not just about interest rates, the laws of demand and supply. I mean, at its core, economics is the study of how we allocate resources. It's a study of choice, and as a result, it covers a wide range of areas. So, for example, there's a famous economics paper that looked at the effect of putting cameras in classrooms in a developing country as a randomised control trial, and how does that affect teacher attendance? Because poor teacher attendance is a huge issue in developing countries. So I remember reading this paper about economics and mental health. It's a fairly new field in economics, which surprised me given the significance of mental health as an issue in our society and the role that mental health can play in economic decision making. And I remember just reading about psychological poverty traps. So this is the idea that someone with poor mental health makes poor economic choices, which leads to poor economic outcomes. And the stress of those poor economic outcomes leads to a deterioration in mental health. So that really motivated me to look at economics and mental health.
What drew you to that paper in the first place?
I think, I guess the earlier point that it's such an important issue, mental health.
Because you had been studying remotely, I assume, if it was last year, and a lot of mental health discussion was going on at that time. Is that kind of the reason why you headed towards that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, as we know, obviously COVID-19 was the dominant public health issue last year, but there was also a massive spike in mental health issues in the community. And so that sparked my interest. And also the Productivity Commission did a mammoth inquiry last year into mental health in Australia. Now, for those listeners who don't know, the Productivity Commission is the government's microeconomic think tank, and they're completely independent, and they advise the government on key issues. And it was the first time they looked into mental health. And I think all of us here agree that mental health issues impose a significant human cost on society. I think one in every 5 Australians experience a mental health issue, and I think it is something like 9 individuals each day commit suicide. It's a horrific issue. there is also a significant economic cost to mental health, and the Productivity Commission estimated it to be $220 billion per year. That's not just the cost in treating mental health. That's the so when an employee turns up to work suffering from mental health issues, it's the cost of that foregone productivity, that they're not working at capacity.
And it's still somewhat taboo, I think, to talk about it for a lot of people, especially the older generation. How does economics factor that in to try to get some numbers on what's happening when you don't actually know whether people are telling you whether they're having mental health issues?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, because probably economics wouldn't deal directly with the stigma and that still surrounds mental health issues. I think there are two ways economics can help. The first would be to analyse the effectiveness of destigmatisation policies, so whether it's an ad campaign, being able to analyse the effectiveness of that policy in achieving desired outcomes like increased acceptance of mental health in society. The other aspect where economics can help is greater understanding of the issue. I think it shocked me, even as an economics student, knowing about the significant economic cost of mental health. It's not just it's not just a case of human cost. And there is an economic imperative for us to act on mental health in Australia.
Can I ask, presumably when you came to this problem and you were drawn to it, especially when you saw this Productivity Commission paper come out, how did you... Well, did you already have a sense of the solutions that might be out there for this kind of thing based on what you'd studied? Like, you didn't just come to it as thinking, this is a really wicked problem I want to tackle, but I think I can add something here.
Not really. I mean, the solutions, look, I'd be very lucky.
He likes a challenge.
It's a mammoth issue, and it goes right to the core of what gives us satisfaction in life, and I think that's a question we'll still be answering in the next 1,000 years. So I think for me, in terms of how I could contribute, I think the way I like to think about social issues is so I'm an effective altruist, so I think about issues in terms of their importance, their neglect, and their tractability. So importance, obviously we know mental health is a very important issue. In terms of its neglect, for some reason, I'm not sure why, economics has neglected mental health in their field. And in terms of tractable solutions, initially I was sceptical of economics being a potential solution. However, after reading this paper and analysing the studies that have been done in this area, things like cognitive behavioural therapy, psychotherapy, even just giving individuals cash. They've done randomised control trials of these in developing countries, and has shown to significantly improve mental health outcomes and economic outcomes.
So there's a couple of Oxford, academics at least, Toby Ord being one of them, an Aussie who's involved with the effective altruism movement. Are you going to have any opportunity to be working?
I hope so. I haven't made the outreach yet, but I hope so. And Oxford is a significant hub for effective altruism. They have the Global Priorities Institute there as well, which is an effective altruism think tank. And
can you outline some of what effective altruism is?
So I guess it's the idea that it's about providing rigour to the way we give resources to solve important social issues. So when I think about the criteria, the 3 points of importance, neglect, and tractability, the idea, to give an example, there are charities that provide blind dogs for blind people, and a blind dog, a guide dog, is did I say blind dog by the way?
That does seem like an ineffective form of altruism.
A guide dog.
The blind leading the blind.
A guide dog.
This podcast.
A guide dog is a very is quite inexpensive a solution for someone suffering from blindness. And of course, we need guide dogs in our society. The question is can you get more bang for your buck, essentially, by giving money to, I'm going to get this terribly wrong, but there is an illness in the third world, someone correct me, that can give people temporary blindness. And you can deliver a more desirable outcome by giving that money to develop to those in the developing world, if you care about, say, delivering the biggest bang for your buck.
And it's kind of that sort of utilitarian maxim, yes, isn't it? Greatest good for the greatest number, which we can get into a discussion. I'm sure Brendan might have a few challenges to throw at that philosophical viewpoint, but we can get to that later. But so you're heading to Oxford to.
Well, I've got to ask, how did you get a scholarship at Oxford?
Yeah, it's very difficult. So I guess for me, I'd always wanted to go to Oxford. And fortunately, there are a number of really good organisations in Australia that provide that funding. For example, there's the John Monash Foundation. Everyone's heard of the Rhodes Scholarship. And then more recently, the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilization have opened up scholarships. And I applied for all of them, and I was fortunate enough to receive receive one from the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilization.
Was it based on results that you'd got in the past, things that you had to submit? What was there?
Yeah, so absolutely. So they, all these organisations require a personal statement and, great academic results, achievements in co-curricular activities. The key point I'd make, though, is you can show the goods on your academics and your co-curricular activities. The question is, do you have a clear purpose for why you're going overseas to choose this degree? You can't go to one of these organisations and say, I want to do economics because I want to become a management consultant.
So you had that idea of mental health and economics before applying?
Yeah, it was sort of, I guess, like 2020 for me. Obviously, it was the final year of my honours, but it was also a year where I had to think, okay, what do I want to do with my life? And, one of these options was, further study. And I knew that, it would be great to get a scholarship for it. And it sort of was, fortunate for me that at the same time as thinking about what I wanted to do in the future, I became interested in economics and mental health. So that was the purpose behind my application to the Ramsay Centre. And I said, listen, I want to make economic policies that improve mental health outcomes in Australia.
So how are you seeing that coming together? Like, how does a person even go about studying that?
Yes, it's a really good question. So, I guess
one they presumably asked you.
Yes, of course. I would say that it consists of 3 stages. So the first stage I would call pre-season training. And this is where you need to learn your core economic skills. And fortunately, the course at Oxford does that. So the first year is just core economic subjects. The second stage is going to be your research. And how I imagine this is going to happen is I'm looking for them at the moment, natural experiments to analyse.
Can you take us through that concept a bit? Because I've heard a bit about it in some more recent economic work that I've sort of seen coming out. What's a natural experiment? How does it arise?
Okay, so a natural experiment is a form of essentially quasi-experimental variation where you can ascertain causal relationships between economic variables. So what does that actually mean? Well, in economics, there is a challenge of distinguishing between causal relationships and relationships just that are correlated. So the classic one, for example, is, and one that interests me is, let's say you plotted an individual's income and say whether that individual was depressed or not. So you could use the DAS21 or another scale like that. Of course, you would expect to see those who are more depressed earn less income. Now, it is wrong to infer from that data that a person who is depressed earns less, and that is a causal relationship. Because that's just a simple, bivariable analysis we've done, and we haven't considered what else could be driving that relationship. And there are two other factors we need to consider. The first is that an individual who, obviously the actual effect of depression on income, but then also the effect that income has on depression. We know that it's out there that individuals who live under economic scarcity are more likely to be depressed. The other factor we need to consider is whether there are unobservable characteristics that are driving someone's depression and also driving someone's income. And that sort of unobserved confounding variable can make us infer wrong results from that data. So that's where a natural experiment comes into play, or a randomised controlled trial. You can use experimental variation to get causal relationships because you can essentially remove those potential biases when you're analysing that relationship.
So any ideas on where you're going to find a natural experiment for mental health?
Look, it's still in its infancy, this project, so I'm still reading about it. I think with natural experiments, it is incredibly difficult to find them. They first require a really good understanding of the theory behind natural experiments and making sure you tick all the boxes so that it looks like an experiment. There are plenty of examples, and I can delve into them of say.
Would you have to remove as many variables as possible, like only do the sample within a certain industry, for example?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So, and I guess that's another really interesting question of where you might be able to find a natural experiment, but it does limit the relevance and significance of your findings if it's constricted to a certain group of people who may not be representative of the general population.
But a factor like industry could have say you're working in a highly stressful environment, police officers or nursing or something where you have to deal with something that could actually cause mental health issues. How do you factor that in? So
you can add them as a simple control variable in an analysis, which is what most people do. The interesting question though, this is I think a form of collider bias, where if you control for a variable that is in itself an outcome of that experiment, that causes a big issue. So to give you some context for my honours year, I looked at the effect of childhood exposure to war on intimate partner violence, and I used the Eritrean-Ethiopian war as a natural experiment. Now, when we think about intimate partner violence, there is a lot of research that someone who is unemployed is more likely to commit intimate partner violence. However, I cannot use employment status as a control variable because the war does affect someone's employment status. So it can create this bias in the data that's not initially obvious that can really affect your results.
That seems to me the Eritrean war, as in terms of a natural experiment, very complex and tricky natural experiment.
Absolutely,
to try and conduct that. Is I'm assuming there might be easier ones to work with, and that sounds like a very complex example that you try to control those variables.
Very difficult. I mean, no natural experiment is easy.
No, but that seemed particularly hard.
The war was difficult because it's a very blunt natural experiment. I mean, the easiest way to think about what a perfect natural experiment would look like is think of your classic randomised controlled trial. So, you get an individual's, and let's say you wanted to investigate the effect of giving an individual $100 of cash on their mental health outcomes. You might collect, say 2,000 people, flip a coin each time. One gets $100, the other one doesn't. That's the gold standard. With a war, the problem is that a war, although you may not be living close to the war, it still affects you. You see it on your TV. It affects your economic outcomes. So it was a very blunt natural experiment. And that was a challenge for me because it did limit the sort of power of my findings, given that there were limitations in the natural experiment.
I just want to kind of walk back here. Yeah. So you've got this kind of interest in mental health and economics. A few years ago in your undergraduate, from what I understand, doing a bit of a deep dive on universal basic income. What is it that you think kind of gives rise to those interests? Why have economists started looking at mental health? Why did they start looking again at universal basic income? Where does that come from?
It's a really interesting question. I think it does come from, obviously that definition of economics about how we allocate resources. And I think the ideas, if we look at the great economic thinkers of the past, people like Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, John Maynard Keynes, these guys, they thought about the role of an economist as, very open. So, for example, John Maynard Keynes likened an economist to, a plumber, a politician, a great philosopher. And for an issue like universal basic income, an economist can both use the tools of, your econometrics, your statistics to analyse the policy. But an economist as well can also consider using, one of those frameworks of, say, utilitarianism or something like that, the kind of the costs and the benefits to an individual, quantify those costs where they can be quantified, and do a really holistic dive into an issue like UBI. Now, it might be a bit presumptuous of economists that they can, they are the only ones who have the toolkit to investigate an issue like that. I guess it lends itself nicely to economics.
And so I guess these economists need to be working closely with other disciplinarians to really get all the appropriate data they need to kind of put the picture together. Is that correct?
Have a very broad range of skills and experience, right?
Absolutely, yeah. No, collaboration is key. And unfortunately, too often in economics, particularly academic economics, there isn't enough collaboration. And it's something I'd hope to change, given the multifaceted nature of mental health.
Did you do much collaboration at school?
That's a good question.
Because we try to do it, and there's always problems trying to do it, and whether everyone's happy if they're getting a group mark. There's lots of little problems like that. Someone doesn't want to work with that person. Do you remember any times when you're doing that at school?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
And does it help you now?
Yeah. So I think I'd say two things on that. I think first, in terms of the collaboration, it kind of happened in a very informal way at school. So mainly with the IB diploma program, a good way of collaboration was, for example, us as a group of my friends who were doing it. We read each other's extended essays and provide feedback, and it was interesting, say, hearing someone from a science background criticise a literature essay. So I found that collaboration really interesting. I guess, though, in terms of, where I don't think it happened enough.
A bit of a difference there, though. You get to choose who you collaborate with.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Which is not real life.
Absolutely, yeah. And it probably didn't happen enough, the collaboration. And it's probably more a result of the education system in general. It's something that, when I was reflecting on it, and I was certainly guilty of it when I was younger, is this obsession over Marx and ticking all the boxes to go to university, and it's just it's unfortunately due to.
So do you think it should be something that we do in schools, or do you think we can leave that to later when you have a bit more life experience?
I think we can do it in schools because it's the issue is I guess that the demands of the system do not cater for collaboration. I think we can do it in school. Because, yes, one of the issues, obviously there's obsession over Marx, but I guess one of the big issues within education, both at school and at university, is how to apply the skills you learn at an education institution to the real world. And it's something that I didn't do enough of in my early years.
Do you think application is tackled enough at school, or is it too theoretical?
It's a really good question, that.
Because my personal opinion is that we've kind of got it the wrong way around. I think we hit the theory very hard and don't apply enough.
This is an interesting one, right? When you're trying to kind of consider something like economics and mental health, and you're saying you go to Oxford, they slap you in pre-season training to make sure that you're fit enough and that you have the skills to actually.
And then you've got to work with someone that you don't like, and you don't have any experience doing that.
That really interesting balance between theory and application. How much theory you need to be able to tackle that problem from an informed perspective.
Yeah.
I guess that pre-season is assuming that you just need to have a bit of this theoretical stuff under your belt, or you're not going out there into the wild on behalf of this university, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's probably a similar challenge that a lot of schools face is, how much pre-season training or time on the training wheels do you give students before letting them apply their skills in the real world? And I think you're probably right, Steve, in that the balance is too far tilted to the training wheels. I think that's just a lot of it, the demands of the system, like making sure you have a good mark to put on your CV, and your CV isn't, say, capturing the skills you gain from collaboration.
You had a long time at Scotch.
Yeah.
Out of that, what do you look back at as the most valuable foundations that were kind of laid? We're sort of, taking a bit of a chip at
Don't lie to us.
maybe whether education has the balance right. Where are the strengths that you feel your schooling laid a foundation, and maybe the follow up is kind of where did you find yourself shortchanged or lacking when you got into university life?
It's a really good question. So I think for me, obviously I can't speak for the experiences of some of the other boys, but for me I did the IB diploma. So I guess I would say there are four things that are great benefits I took away from Scotch. I mean, first of all, the relationships I had with the people here, teachers, students. I had really great relationships with some of them. And then the second benefit was self-discipline. So, I learnt the values of hard work and organisation, with the co-curricular activities that are available at Scotch, and then also the demands of the IB program. There was also intellectual curiosity. So, for example, it's, probably why I chose to study economics was I remember doing economic development in IB economics. So this is, using economics to look at, the issues that developing countries face. And that was just that fascinated me.
Was that from you? Was that from Scotch, though, that intellectual curiosity?
It does work both ways, I guess. Some of it did come from me, but also at least Scotch, I didn't know about developing economics at all, and I didn't know that economics could look at developing countries and solve some really important issues there, like how they grow, how they deal with poverty.
So here's where that connection to the real world, in a sense, provided that curiosity, that engagement that perhaps maybe some of the other content didn't quite have, maybe. I don't know.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the other thing, probably one of the most important things, was intellectual humility. So being able to know what you don't know. So obviously Brendan grilled me a lot at school, and when I presented a talk essay to him, the first draft was just crossing it out, and but at least it made me really think about what I was saying, how I was learning, and
he helped you learn to know that there was a lot you didn't know.
Yes, absolutely, and I think it's an important.
I like to consider that a strength,
but it's a really important trait when you get to the real world.
You know everything, you don't need to try, right?
Absolutely,
so if you understand that there are many things that I do not yet understand, you're pushed and you drive. You have drive.
But I think the trick there is, though, he's also saying to have that curiosity despite not knowing, rather than to just go, I just can't be bothered learning anything about that.
Yeah.
To have that, you got to have that combo, don't you? That
Motivation.
curiosity with the humility.
Yeah.
Was it a risk going IB at the time? How did you feel about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a risk. Yeah. For particularly my parents, who I both love dearly, of course. But it was interesting.
This is going on YouTube, by the way.
It was interesting that, for them, it was a bit of a risk, to do IB back in those days.
I think they'd be happy with it now, though, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think they are.
They didn't have to pay the university fees.
So it was certainly a risk back then, and I guess for me, the way I felt about it was, if I compared the person who, say the Drummond who did waste versus the Drummond who did IB, I'd feel that the Drummond who did IB was more prepared to take on the real world due to that, I think, intellectual humility and curiosity, that I could get from the program. But in terms of perhaps where, any shortcomings, maybe it does go back to that same point of, not having enough exposure to the real world to apply my skills. I guess maybe two things. Maybe it's expected at university that you do that. And maybe the alternative as well is, I spent a lot of time studying, and, maybe I should have spent more time actually getting out there and trying to do things.
So speaking of getting out there, right? At university, like let's say at Melbourne and then on to Oxford, I'm really interested in, because we had a guest, John Evans, who's an evolutionary biologist, and he said a lot of the work he does now is with people from all over the world. He's sort of liaising with someone from Finland, and they're kind of all, people all over the world working on the same problem. And I'm curious, when you get to Oxford, is that just kind of, in all these different areas, philosophers and psychologists, and is there a sense that you get, there's a structure around putting you together there to get those cross-pollination of ideas, or do you have to go out and find them, and how do you see that interaction working?
That's a really good question. So, first of all, it does depend on the issue you're exploring. I guess for me, economics and mental health, that's about as broad as you can get. So I will need to talk to, experts in the medical field and everywhere to try and, reap the benefits of that collaboration and help inform my research. So, yes, absolutely, there will be an expectation for me to do that. I guess in terms of, whether Oxford can facilitate that collaboration, short answer is, I don't know. I need to go there and try and find out. But I can say more generally is that there is still, similar to school, that siloed nature within universities that, you're in your degree discipline, study that degree, get good marks, and off you go to a job.
You'd have a good opportunity to go and speak to the psychology department.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
I've got a question probably around that, which is, and it might be a two-part question. I guess that the first one was going to be, do you reckon the future from here is written by the discipline specialist or kind of written by the polymath who's traversing across disciplines? The second one is probably, you're an economics guy embarking on an economics postgrad. What does the future look like for economics 20 years from now? If we had you back in 20 years and, not only do you have a Nobel Prize and...
We won't be able to afford him in 20 years.
And there'll be no mental health issues in Australia and the world.
So aside from solving mental health issues in the entire world, what do you reckon the field might look like 20 years from now? So probably first the discipline polymath thing, and then maybe the future.
Yep, right. That's two huge questions there. So I guess the first of all, in terms of who's going to create value in the future.
Very economic thing to say.
I would certainly say it's going to be those who are going to traverse fields for sure. But look, it really does depend on the discipline you're exploring. I mean, what I can say with economics is that, yes, it's going to depend on those who traverse the, say the fields of economics and psychology and medicine and, biology, whatever it is. I guess the point to justify that is, I would ask, okay, do our age-old definitions of disciplines still stand the test of time, and are they going to stand the test of time for the next 100, 200 years? And I doubt that. And we will need that interdisciplinary collaboration to create new knowledge. As for the second question of where economics is going to go, that's a fascinating one. So I think the first thing I'd say is that economics has had a crisis in the last 20 years. Not this recession, but the recession previous, the GFC, did show the significant flaws that are within many economic models out there. And there are many reasons why these economic models were wrong. I think one reason, and I'd agree strongly with Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who wrote about this in The Black Swan, is how some economists did not have skin in the game when they made these economic models. So for those of you who perhaps don't know, I mean, a lot of economic models are built on the assumption of rationality. And with rationality, you can do these very clever things that, okay, because this individual is rational, I could write a mathematical function defining his or her preferences. I can maximize that function using calculus, and that's going to give me, what that person's going to consume.
And that's the assumption that people are rational?
Yes. So the assumption underlying that, and you need that, is that people are rational.
I can't see any issue with that.
No. And it makes it quite easy to solve these models, but as the GFC revealed, and as many predictions of economic models have faltered, people are not rational. And
can I just
yeah.
behavioural economics was around long before the GFC kicked off. So why did economists kind of sleepwalk into the GFC, so to speak, with that and on that principle, if we already kind of had a reasonable grounding? We had Nobel Prize winners who were saying we're not that rational in an economy.
Yeah, I mean, I could get severely criticised by a lot of, quite senior economists out there.
Don't worry, the internet's not permanent. This will never come back to haunt you.
We've only got like 3 guests. It's us. We just watch them over and over again. Try to get the views up.
So I think the first thing I'd say is, so behavioural economics mainly came out of, criticisms of microeconomic theory. And I think, fortunately, microeconomics pre-GFC underwent a credibility revolution. So that's where randomised controlled trials, natural experiments occurred to get causal relationships.
So there is kind of a dividend there of behavioural economics in economics. Is that to say, like, in microeconomics, we can actually say that knowledge is getting better because the method is getting more robust?
Yes, I think so. The issue more is macroeconomics, and I'm not speaking for all macroeconomists here. The issue was that, say, pre-GFC, if you look at these standard macroeconomic models, they're dressed up in an enormous amount of mathematical equations. And I mean, the question that they're asking you're trying to predict the movement of an entire economy, which is extraordinarily difficult. To put it into context, the IMF released their global growth forecasts, and they have gone it wrong every single time, and to the extent that probably a monkey could do better than them, in terms of how to forecast the growth in GDP.
Again, when you apply for your job at the IMF, do you want us to send them there?
I'm sure they're aware of it. Look, I think so. The issue is it's such a big challenge, but it goes back to that old adage of all models are wrong, but some are useful. And a macroeconomic model is useful if it can provide good predictions. And I guess macroeconomists need to acknowledge of what they don't know and the limits of these models. They weren't understood pre-GFC. And a lot of macroeconomists, and unfortunately this is the case within academic economics, is they don't have skin in the game. You know, they sit at universities and they're not part of the policy-making decision. This is not everyone, but some macroeconomists, they're not part of the policy-making, not in the policy-making arena. They don't have anything to lose when they make these predictions. And I think if you have something to lose, you think a lot better about the predictions and what you're saying.
And do you think they're refining this ability to model over time, and is it getting better?
I hope so, and I think it is, yeah. And I think the GFC had a lot of lessons for economics.
You did some work calculating universal basic income, that sort of thing. Challenging one for you. How would we know? I mean, the UBI has kind of received a lot more attention in the last few years. How would we know that there's a better model on the table now than, say, 50 years ago when this was first being floated?
That's a really good question. So one way we can know about this is the more experimental variation that we can get. So I imagine 50 years ago, there was an idea
Less
in theory.
data,
Yeah,
right?
less data, and it was all sort of very theoretical and a lot of sort of hand waving about the actual do these benefits exist? But now with more data, with say the experiments that they're doing in Europe, I think it's Manitoba. That's the name of the town. There's a famous experiment that they did there that wasn't a UBI, but it looked like a UBI.
In Canada, is it?
Yes, in Canada, and I think there might be another one in the US.
So this is where they're actually doing this?
No, this happened a long time ago.
Okay. Is there anywhere doing it?
Yeah. So I can't call out the specific ones, but definitely in Europe they're doing trials of it. And I guess perhaps your question, Brendan, is are we getting better in our confidence with this model?
Yeah, I guess how do we know that what we, the economists in the lead up to the GFC, they're sitting pretty thinking that they've got models that have pretty good explanatory power. So I guess that what I'm wondering is, how do we know that, say, the UBI model and the UBI modelling is better than it was?
Yes, I think, first of all, the data and the evidence that we can collect. I would probably say it's really just that. I mean, at the end of the day, you are obviously delving into a lot of the big ethical issues about providing UBI, and at the end of the day, it is just the data and the experiments we can get.
I wanted to ask actually further to that question, the role of data science and artificial intelligence and these kind of things that are playing in the work of an economist, and how they use data science, to analyse things, and whether that's bringing us closer to reliable models.
Look, I mean, I can't speak too much about data science because I haven't done it. I guess. Going back to that UBI part, economics is, yes, John Maynard Keynes had the great vision that we could, economists could do everything, but there are limits. I mean, you say with an issue like UBI, it goes right to the core about, how we should live our lives. I mean, the dominant mantra over at least, 2,000 years has been work occupies, say, 80% of your life, and then, leisure, say, the other 20%. With an issue like UBI, the idea that someone could, say, just accept the UBI, live off that, and do something that they're really passionate about is not prevalent in society. And economics probably can't answer a question like that. I mean, they're going to try to, but it can't. And another point I would make with the UBI is COVID has provided a really interesting...
Because there's been little sections of little UBIs.
Yes, essentially, like with JobKeeper and what people have done
and
because of that.
And you see what happens. I know of examples, like actual examples, where people are, no, I don't want to come into work today because I get more money if I stay home.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And then thinking about, people who say, oh, gee, I mean, for once I can, this has given me an opportunity to change careers, maybe switch from that hospitality job to something that I really like.
Becomes a little bit different, doesn't it, in that circumstance?
Absolutely. And, yeah, it's interesting looking at the statistics in the US. I think it's a 50% increase in applications for sort of new businesses or startups. So there's huge entrepreneurial growth because of COVID. And yeah, I mean, economics, you can write a model on like, say someone prefers leisure, by this amount, and they're going to, do an optimal balance between leisure and work. But it doesn't really work like that in real life. So,
have you looked much into why some people like change and why some people don't?
No,
it's a little broad. But, for the likes of UBI, there would be a large cohort, I guess, of the people that are very comfortable with their life, who generally don't like change because that could be seen as a threat to them being continued to be comfortable. They're the ones that would, I guess, have the money taken away from them, in particular to go towards income for people that are doing nothing. So it's, how does that thought process come into economics?
Yeah, so just to clarify, you're saying that say individuals who might lose from a UBI policy in terms of that they might have to pay more taxes or
taking away money from people that are higher income. That's kind of how it works, right?
Absolutely. No, this is a really interesting question about how we value social utility in economics and the distribution of benefits among society. It's an awesome issue, this, in terms of one to explore. So, you have a variety of perspectives. So you have, say, the utilitarian perspective, which is maximise social utility, whatever the costs, so whatever, say the losses of, someone who's going to be now made worse off due to the UBI policy. Alternatively, you have other perspectives like Pareto efficiency, which is the idea that you should not make anyone worse off. You should implement policies that, make people either the same or a bit better off. So that issue goes, is really interesting with UBI about how you, do you adopt a utilitarian perspective or one similar to Pareto efficiency in how you design the policy? So do you have to increase taxes? Do you not increase taxes? So that's really fascinating.
There's a gentleman by the name of, I think his name's Jeremy Yang. Is it Yang, the presidential candidate?
Andrew Yang, yes.
Andrew Yang, sorry, not Jeremy Yang, who was very much promoting this idea of universal basic income. Bernie Sanders.
I'm not sure.
Mate,
I know Yang was. I'm not sure about
Yang was pushing this pretty hard as part of his platform, but the big reason was because he was saying, automation is coming really soon, so we have to do it. It's like an imperative. There's going to be people out of work,
wasn't it?
Yeah. So are you as concerned as he kind of made out in terms of the speed at which all of this could be happening? Are you as fearful?
So I'm not an expert on automation. They're still part of one of the big issues is the lack of experiments you can run with automation. But they're creating some quite interesting economic models to look at this issue in terms of, does that lead to, jobs lost? I guess for me, what I would be thinking about is how is it going to affect the way we live our lives and the values we have towards work? So, whether individuals are going to, say, substitute work for leisure. I think that's really interesting.
But in terms of the kind of the imperative of it, we need to do it soon because our entire economy is about to be overwhelmed by this automation problem. What's your kind of intuition on that? I know that's not your necessary area of expertise, but
it's a tough one. I would say, it's a really difficult one because I just don't know how quickly it's going to happen with automation.
That's why I think it's important to consider how people look at change, because that is a big change, and there will be people who resist it, and they will have influence on how quickly that comes if they can resist it. they will, most likely. So, yeah, it must be quite a big factor.
Yeah, of course. I guess, yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm really interested in is, someone who continues working at a job that they don't like, even though they might say that there is, something that they prefer. For example, there's a really good book that I would recommend to anyone who is interested in mental health, Lost Connections by Johan Hari, who looks at cases of individuals who are stuck in the work and they're doing it, to afford a kind of life that they think is desirable. They look around their neighbours. Yeah, of course. Like Keeping Up with the Joneses, like looking at the lives of their neighbours, and they think, yes, this is where I need to be, even though their heart is telling them that they need to change jobs. That's what I find quite interesting, and it'd be interesting to see how individuals, how many individuals say feel like that, how COVID has perhaps changed that. I'd be really interested
and
to
the
see
impact on mental health on that front.
That's a non-fiction book, is it?
Yeah, non-fiction, Johan Hari. Yeah, and he does a really good job in breaking down all the different factors contributing to mental health. I guess one other thing that I'd say that we haven't really looked at is the impact of UBI on inequality. So, because this is something that interests me a bit, is and Thomas Piketty has done a lot of really good work on this. So looking at how, say, the top 10% of Americans in the income distribution earn, I think it's like 45 or 55% of America's wealth, and that's only increasing. And then it's like the top 1% earn, just an astonishing amount of wealth for America. And you think about that and how it's increased since 1980. And we can debate the causes of this all day long. But I mean, for us, I found it a huge awakening reading those statistics and thinking, like, this is the society we live in now, where you have this huge inequality.
Is there a sense that economics has a natural ethical responsibility in that? Like, is economics neutral on the issue of inequality, or and do you think that the field is shifting in that regard?
Economics does take a strong position on inequality, and the majority of economists that I talk to, really care about promoting equality among society, and they're fascinated about debating, the ideas of, like not depriving people of wealth that they've earned and worked hard for.
So you don't kiss your posters of Hayek and Friedman at night.
Why did you mention that?
Sore spot.
No, I'm not a Friedman and Hayek fan. I think it's the economics gets a lot of unfair criticism from people who believe that most economists are like Friedman and Hayek, who had great ideas. Don't get me wrong. One can debate, though, whether those ideas, particularly with a lot of the policies that occurred in the 1980s, whether those policies did lead to a desirable outcome in terms of wealth equality, because it's only increasing as we can see it. Inequality, sorry, yeah.
And so you think the general population of economists out there are far less skewed towards that laissez-faire notion,
I think so,
as people might think?
Yeah, the GFC was a huge awakening for a lot of people. The revolution in credibility for microeconomics, partly spawned by behavioural, has played a huge role in people using laissez-faire, yes, but being very clear about when they're going to use it, and really questioning. It goes back to that: all models are wrong, but some are useful. So thinking about, if I'm writing this paper, is it useful? Is it going to change society for the good? Or am I just writing it to get tenure? It's an important question that economists need to think about.
Well, I think I was going to probably say, Drummond, thank you so much for your time today, and it's been a really interesting snapshot of the early stages of someone embarking on a life of learning, a life of scholarship, and where it sits and stands today. So Thank you so much for your time, and it was certainly a pleasure discussing this with you.
No, awesome. Thanks a lot, Brendan. It's been great to talk with you.
Well, I want to say thank you as well to both of you for being here tonight on behalf of Steve and I. But before you go, Drummond, we've got some quick-fire questions for you.
Awesome.
Very, very quick-fire,
Let's
because
go.
we have to do it. We have to do them with you. So you're on a deserted island.
Yeah.
Favourite album?
That's a really good question. Pet Sounds, Beach Boys.
Oh, that is a good album.
Yeah, I'd go that.
What is a book that you've read in the last 5 years that you would most recommend? You've kind of already told us that one, haven't you? Other than that one.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I think probably Fooled by Randomness by Nicholas Nassim Taleb. That I would definitely recommend in terms of one to read. That's in terms of non-fiction.
Do you read any fiction? Do you read,
I do read fiction. Yeah. No. So in terms of fiction, the book that has left the biggest impact on me has been 1984. I just remember feeling so frightened after reading that book. It's terrifying. I'd recommend that to anyone. It's not an easy read, but it's a beautifully
It's one of the great ones.
brutal book. Yeah.
Okay, and a habit that you've formed in the last couple of years that has been really beneficial to you? Have there been any new habits that you've formed in the last couple of years?
I would say running for me. Yeah. So just being able to wake up now early in the morning and go for a run has been really beneficial for me. In terms of other habits,
Podcasting, surely.
Getting scholarships.
I guess I would certainly, I'd say this is only a habit that's kind of in the last year. It's been great to take a break from study and work, and then also just connect with people more. It was something I wasn't doing enough while I was at uni and at school. I was spending a lot of time studying. I probably spent too much, but I'm happy where I am. But trying to connect more with people is a goal that I have to live a more balanced life.
That's brilliant. Great way
What
to
about
finish.
another little quick fire one?
Yes.
I didn't teach you, but any tips for these two guys that taught you to improve their teaching skills?
We don't have another hour.
From there.
It's a really
We
good question.
We got to go.
That's a really good question. I think for me, look, both these guys didn't do this, but perhaps it's more as a warning for don't obsess over marks. I think you've got to definitely encourage people to think outside of that. And I know it's I was guilty of it. I think we all are.
I think schools are just hamstrung by that sometimes.
Yeah,
as
of
well.
course. Is just the obsession to get results, get to uni, get a job. Like the most transformative educational experiences I've had are the ones where I've changed my mindset, not the ones where I've got the best marks. Like the ones where I've actually changed and grown as a person. And I think if you have that obsession over marks, you're neglecting potential opportunities to do that.
That was a really awesome conversation. Yeah,
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thanks a
Drummond.
lot,
It was
Steve.
really good having you in here.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, Drummond. Brendan, friend and colleague, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thanks, Brendan.
And sharing, and especially your relationship with Drummond. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Really, really lovely to have listened from the other side and now to be on it. So,
And Drummond, finally, thanks again, and all the best with your journey at Oxford. It's very exciting, and we'll all be kind of watching closely to see how that unfolds, and hopefully you get to do some great stuff over there.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Drummond.